Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, and today I would like to delve back into the more metaphysical topics, which is, let's discuss or go over the solar cycle information. So what I'll do is just kind of go over some of the associations first, and then we'll go into the more woo-woo type stuff, or the more mystical. So the basic aspects are the metal associated with the sun is gold. The element is obviously fire, for a lot of reasons. The angel is generally seen as Archangel Michael, but can also, especially in the more modern cultures and more modern ideas, you'll start to see more of Archangel Metatron coming forward with that. To me, they could both be rulers of the same planet. It's it's totally cool. The energy that's associated with the sun is generally passion, aggression, creation, life being supported and encouraged, intellect, and logic. The sun is seen as a very masculine planet. And through most cultures, going back to the Sumerians, and probably before that, if we were to understand what was being carved and written before the Sumerians, the sun is primarily seen as a masculine energy. There is a couple of groups that I've ran across in my studies that reference the sun as feminine, but it is an extremely rare thing. It's, like I said, it's been 2 or 3 cultures that I've read about that see the sun either as androgynous or as feminine, which is a little bit interesting, but because the energy coming from the sun tends to be more masculine, it's very dominant, very forward and aggressive. The sun has primarily 2 cycles, which is, one is a daily cycle, morning, noon, afternoon, evening, or the yearly. And the yearly actually follows the wheel of the year. And when you break them down into 4 patterns, you have the morning, which tends to be associated with winter, setting your intentions, building those new beginnings, working towards a goal. The noon is springtime, which is when you're building, you're working to those goals, you're setting a stronger foundation, you're probably, starting to build more onto that. The afternoon is associated with summer, and that is when your manifestation is reached. That's when it becomes into fruition. This is when your goal has been reached, your project's coming up for completion, and then you have the evening, which is associated with fall on the year schedule, and that is the winding down, the releasing of what doesn't serve you, the preparation to go into the dark, to be reborn the following morning. The ancients believed that the sun literally died in the fall and was reborn on the winter solstice. And so there was a period of mourning, which was generally from around Samhain or October 31st until December 21st, which was the winter solstice. There was a period in there that was, the sun was gone. It's just when everything was cold and blustery and everything died, like in the northern hemisphere. But it was just a period of quietude. It was everything. You're pulling in, you're going inside, you're pulling away, because the Lord had pulled away, the sun had pulled away from the planet at that point, is how they saw it. The sun is the source of all life in our solar system that we know of. Even the moon gets its light from our sun. But without the moon, the tides wouldn't flow, because the moon is what controls our watery tides. So we do need, as humans on this planet, both of those planets to survive. Every 11 years or so, the sun has a period of time called the solar flare window, or solar flare period. It's where the sun releases this built-up electromagnetic or radioactive particles into space. Since we don't actually know the full process of what's going on inside the sun, we have some theories. As our science is progressing, we're learning more. So we're not sure if it's fully electromagnetic, fully radioactive or a combination of the two, but it releases these particles into space. And when it hits the Earth, it can cause electronics, especially during these flare periods, to really mess up. It messes with all forms of electronic communication. It affects us as humans as well. We tend to be extremely emotionally reactive when the sun is going through a flare period. You can be very grumpy, very happy, and it can swing within seconds. It's really, really intense energy during this time period. And it comes along with a few other, sometimes the physical effects, like you will burn, if you're like me and very white, when you go outside you'll burn a lot faster during the times of a solar flare. So it's things like that where the intensity of the sun is just a lot more there. And so you see these times as times to wield that excess solar energy to really cause massive transformation in your life. And if you look at your own life, you tend to track in periods of 9, 11, or 13 years. And when you look back at your life, you will see, some people will say that it happens as low as 7 years. My experience has been 9, 11, or 13. And during those time periods, you can shift. Like, the way I look at it for me personally is the first 9 years of your life are learning about existing. From the next 9 years are learning about the world around you. After that, it's getting into like relationships, and you build on that nines. But the sun does this on an 11-year period. And so every 11 years, you can literally shift your entire life using this solar energy into another aspect or another level, upgrading your life as you go along on the using the solar energy. In the old beliefs, the sun was aligned with the green man or the god or the Lord, depending on the culture. So the year that we deal with, it was the year in a life of the god. It wasn't just like, oh look, the sun's coming back, days are getting longer. To them, this was a sacred event. The god was returning, was bringing his blessings back to the planet. So the start of the solar cycle, as I mentioned earlier, was December 21st, Yule, which is when the new god is born, coming back from the underworld, a triumphant return. As the year moves on, the days are getting longer, and the sun increases in its power. And the sun grows stronger through Candlemas, through Ostra, which are two more feminine holidays, building towards the strapping young man that the god presents around May 1st, which is Beltane. Now, there's 2 times of the year when the veil is really thin. Everyone focuses on Samhain because that's when the spirits of the dead can pass over and visit us and go back home. But on May 1st, the veil also thins. This veil allows us to access the angelic and the fairy realms. So during this window around May 1st, the god is in his full prowess, if you will. He has matured in many, many ways, and it is time for him and the goddess to consecrate the relationship. And so this is a time of very, very, very amorous energy. But that also is why the fairies are popping in, because they tend to be a little more friendly than some of the other spiritual energies out there. And this is when the goddess has reached her fertile peak. This is when the Lord is coming into his full manliness. And so this May 1st time is very Dionysian. It's very hedonistic. The focus is on celebration of life in its fullness and the return of the sun to the land to bless the crops, to bless the animals. Babies are being born, chicks are being hatched. It's a very intense energy around this time period. And then you move again as the Lord matures from this amorous young male into the fullness of the warrior that he is around June 21st. And this is when the sun is at the peak power and the god is in his prime. This is that fully masculine man, maybe a little bit of beard if that's how you want to see him. And it's just the power of the sun is at its highest, and it's the power of the god at this time is at his highest. And then from this point on, the days start to get shorter. June 21st is the longest day of the year. And so from that point on, the God's power starts to wane, starts to pull back. But you don't really notice it because the planet actually is tipped in such an alignment that we're getting a lot more heat from the sun at this point. But the reality of it is your days are shortening after that point. And it's the gradual decline, which is the life cycle of the masculine energy. There comes up to a peak, and then it's a slow process back into death, rebirth, and continuing on. So this cycle is very much reminiscent of the way the man's life tends to run anyway. Okay. So as you're moving through, you go through the first harvest, which is in August. You have the second harvest, which is around September 21st, which is your fall or autumn equinox. And at this point, the Lord, the God, is very much starting to age. And the days are getting shorter, it's getting chilly, you want to have that light jacket type of a feeling. And the trees are starting to change, going from greens and vibrant and life to reds, oranges, and yellows. And during this time period, you do your first harvest, September 21st, you do your second harvest, which is a lot of your above ground crops. But moving towards October 31st, which is Samhain, when the Lord pierces the veil, opening it up to the underworld, passes into the underworld. This is also called the third harvest, and this is when you would generally start to make sure that your root crops were put away, that your like carrots, potatoes, onions, things like that were out of the ground. This is also a time for, and this isn't meant to be graphic, but it's truthful, this was a time for butchering. This is when you would harvest your cows and your pigs. If you were harvesting chickens, this would be the time to do that, because it is the time period of the Lord leaving the earth. And during this time, it was a celebration, but it was also sadness, because the Lord had to go into the darkness, into the abyss, into the underworld, to basically recharge and regenerate himself so that he could return on December 21st. But during this time, as the land dies, as the trees all go dormant, even the animals, they fatten up and get really lethargic. They don't want to do anything either because it's, cold and miserable out. During this time also, the goddess, the moon, is in mourning. This is when the moon, being out even in the moonlight, just feels colder because she is in mourning. The loss of her mate, the loss of her partner. No, even though she knows he's going to come back, it's still a time of sadness and of just morose feelings. And when you look at how we as humans even today celebrate this time period between October 31st and December 21st, for the most part, it becomes a more serious time in our lives. October is like the last celebration for most of us. Halloween is what we would call it today, but it used to be Samhain. And then you go into this period of just quietude. There's not a lot going on outside. Your animals and stuff are pretty much butchered and put away. Your food's processed for the most part. You might be finishing some of that up. And in like the United States, the end of November is when we would celebrate Thanksgiving. Again, a more serious holiday. It's giving thanks for the things that we have received in the previous year. But it's always holds on to this more somber tones. That it's getting darker out and earlier. Just it's not as much fun as it could be. Not to say there's not winter things you can go out and do, but it's that the mood is shifting into that more somber state. And then it starts to build anticipation, because the origins of Christmas, if we're going to look at that, the time of the birth of Christ would have probably been, if you're going with like the lambs and the young flock animals that were in the biblical accounts, are referencing more of a time in February, March, April-ish. It was set in December to basically copy or mimic what was already being celebrated as the birth of the God, which was December 21st. I'm not exactly sure how they landed on the date of the 25th, but it was in reference to these older pagan traditions of the rebirth of the sun god on December 21st. And that was when, like I said, the rebirth of the god, so it was a time of gift giving. It was more muted celebrations, but more family focused celebrations, whereas Beltane and Midsummer are all about the culture, your city, your tribe, your group, your religious organization. Those are for them. Even Samhain was for the tribe, the family, the group. When you get into Yule, it tends towards a more personal thing. Babies are born to the tribe, but they start with the family. And so this was a time for reconnecting with your loved ones, with your family, also a time of reconnecting with a one-on-one relationship with how you would see God for these different cultures. And there were, like I said, a lot of different names, and so it all depends on how you choose to associate with that. And then as you would warm up through the year, you start to branch out. You're taking, like, if you're going with the family analogy, the baby will get to go to the tribe or the churches or the group gatherings through the rest of the year, building up. And that's that building up of the maturing, that growth cycle that occurs. And the sun goes through this cycle every 11 years. It does it on a yearly cycle and a daily cycle. So you've got this pattern that the ancients knew about. And I think that's the part that is so fascinating to me from a metaphysical standpoint, is they learned a lot about what we are just now starting to understand. Our scientific, quote unquote, minds are starting to understand now. They knew this thousands of years ago. The sun cycles, there's periods of intense solar energy, and it's referenced in a lot of the texts. And I'm not an expert in these older languages, so I have to read the translations. So there could be some, mistakes in there because sometimes people have agendas. But when you look at it from the point of, there was a massive amount of knowledge at those times that was known about how the sun worked, and they made everything celestial, moon, sun, stars, they made it into an aspect of the divine, because they knew that there was a spiritual source of everything. There was a creative energy that built this entire galaxy. It's hardwired into us as humans. And for them to try to understand it, they would use things like the cycles of the sun, the cycles of the moon, the patterns of the zodiac, what the zodiac means, all 12 signs. And so you would build on these beliefs to build their cultures. There were some that were almost exclusively dedicated to solar worship. And then you'd end up with, like, in Egypt, the sun god Ra, or Atum, depending on which age you're in. And then you'd have, like, I just lost his name. Anyway, there's a sun god in almost every culture. There's fire gods, and the fire gods and the sun gods tended to be very closely related. And so it was things like that that helped the everyday person understand how that energy affected us. And when we look at the way culture is today, because we, as you're watching this video, you're probably sitting inside, we pull ourselves away from the natural order, the natural cycle. And I'm not someone who says technology is bad, because I think there's a balance. Technology can be amazing, but they're still outdoors. A lot of YouTubers and a lot of online personalities will tell people, when you start getting too wrapped up in internet drama, go touch grass. They're actually talking about reconnecting with who you are at your core. So when you go outside and you're in the sun, you actually do start to feel different. Your pineal gland, your third eye, which is about halfway, or it's right between your eyebrows and about just an inch in front of your ears, like that's the line where you're at with it. In that area, there are actually optic nerves. They found in science recently, they've actually been able to figure that out. And metaphysically, the pineal gland, even though it is not an open eye, like you can't touch it, it needs sunlight to function. So going outside and not having sunscreen on your face especially, and allowing that point in your face, this area right through here, to experience sunlight unencumbered. Don't put it behind a window, don't put sunglasses on it, don't anything like that. Just going outside and allowing it to have 2 to 3 minutes a day to start with, and then increase as your skin can take it. And allowing that solar energy to actually imprint onto your pineal gland, it will help you open up in an energetic sense. Now, this obviously is not medical advice, but it is metaphysical. There's so much with the human body that recovers itself by being out in the sun. Your aura actually will strengthen. You charge crystals in the sun. You clear them in the moon, but you charge them in the sun. The solar energy is a charging force. It is a way to build. So, and that's kind of, it's the more masculine energy. It's more domineering, not so much dominant, but domineering. It's very forceful energy, and that's can be a good or a bad thing. But it also cycles. Some days you're really aggressive, some days you're not, and it's a pattern of that masculine energy that comes through with the sun, and we can learn a lot, especially the men who watch. We can learn a lot by looking at the cycles of the sun, the day cycles, the year cycle, the 8 spokes of the yearly wheel, and looking at it from the aspect of the ancients believed this about the sun. How can I apply that to how my life is now? And going over a lot of that information, and this goes for the ladies as well, but this energy tends to be more masculine, so it's going to resonate with the men a little bit more. But you go through these cycles and you're like, okay, well, at this point I was a child and I was learning things. And then as you grow, you're like, okay, well, where am I in this year, and what can I use? What skills are going to be the dominant? What is my prime skill? What is my energetic strength type of a thing? And during your prime, that is going to be your focus. And when you look at how the sun guards but gives energy to the moon, that's how men are supposed to interact with their feminine female spouses, is you are an energy force and you lend your energy to the female, and when you do that, she amplifies it. Shakti and Shiva in the Hindu cultures are like that. Shiva is pure creative driving energy force. Shakti forms it. And so it's one of those things where there's a balance. So the solar energy has to be balanced with the lunar energy for us to survive properly. And this video is primarily aimed at the solar energy. I do have another one that I will do soon for lunar energy as well. But when you're working with the solar energy, just understand that you're dealing with a much more projective force, and you're dealing with the more masculine of the energies, just as a way to help understand them a little bit better. And hopefully this resonates with you. Like I said, this is stuff that I've learned over the years. I've studied and I've researched. And if there's anything that needs to be cleared up, just let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and like it, and subscribe for future content, because I am trying to work more with these platforms. And if you have any other thoughts or ideas, you can message or drop them in the comments, or you can find me on my website, which will be linked in the description. And I hope you all have an amazing time, and I will talk to you in a future video.